we're kind of short in time, so let's get started. So this panel is about censorship resistance and resilience, network resilience against essentially censorship. And if you have a censorship resistance, you essentially have a credibly neutral system. So to start off, maybe go down this table with intros, quick intros, 1 to 2 lines.
Sure. I'm Raul, one of the co-founders of DiVa. DiVa is a liquidity-seeking protocol powered by distributed validation technology, and we are basically aiming to make Ethereum validation more decentralized and accessible to everyone.
Hi all, I'm Sebastien, founder of HOPR, which is a transport-level privacy solution. Think about your VPN or Tor, but decentralized and more private. On top of that one, we've been launching what we call the first actually private RPC provider this week, RPCH over HOPR, in short, RPCH. So, yeah, looking forward to talk about privacy and decentralization.
Yeah, I'm Martin. I'm founder of Gnosis.
Cool. So the first question is, why is a credibly neutral system important in general, or to humanity, or to society? And also, why is it important to you personally? And anyone can start.
Martin?
Yeah, I would say, in my view, the promise of neutral platforms is the idea that anyone who wants to build on top can, and I think we have seen this way too often in kind of in the Web 2 world, that we have those very centralized platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Googles of this world, and in my view they lose so much, or in my view they could be so much better if they were open to people to contribute. So kind of if you have those platforms that are used by millions or billions of people, and you have an idea how to make them better, in Web 2 you really can't. I mean, kind of the past is completely unrealistic. If we manage, and to me that's one of the big promises of Web 3, if we manage to build platforms that can also have similar network effects. Network effects are extremely important and can be a very good thing, but they shouldn't lead to a situation where kind of one entity is controlling it and kind of stopping others from contributing. So that's why I think fundamentally that is something to always really carefully watch out. And obviously I just gave the example with this Coinbase L2, that there are spaces, or kind of how realistic is it that everyone equally can build on this platform? That's kind of the piece I'm always very carefully looking at.
Yeah, I guess rehashing some of the things that Martin already said, and I totally agree with, is to me it's about freedom. And Web3 is kind of freedom technology, or as Americans like to say, it's about liberty. And it's about growing that liberty, which I think the Web 2 to a large extent takes away from the individual and empowering the individual with making their own choices. And being empowered is largely driven by decentralization. It's a huge thing, and I think most people understand that. My personal thing that I would like to add is privacy, because if you have people that can follow you every step in the digital world or in the offline world, how free are you really? And that's why I get a little bit annoyed when I see Web3 companies that are announcing, like Uniswap today, that they have a great new upgrade for you to manage your wallet through iCloud. That is not what is growing liberty to me. And that's why I personally think we have to strive for these values of decentralization and privacy as a means to achieve meaningful liberty for the individual.
Yeah, I will say that I fully agree with both of you. Just to add something, maybe I was raised in an area where we weren't that fully dependent on the digital world. and of the digital technology. And I grew up on a decade where we never used something as simple as the World Wide Web. And now that is kind of a key and fundamental part of our lives, I think we have to make it a kind of more accessible to everyone and to guarantee the freedom of everyone to access in equal terms and in a equal way, in a sense. So I mean, it's precisely what you were saying. That is, everything is about freedom. I mean, if I were just looking to make a system more efficient, something like that, I will be working in Web 2. But as we are working in Web 3, I think it comes with a kind of moral responsibility to strive for freedom and to try to make the system not just more resilient, not better for the user, but also accessible to everyone. Doesn't matter who.
Great, thanks. I think, to achieve, really credibly neutral system, you need both decentralization and privacy. I think only one of each would not be sufficient, even as you've seen, especially in Ethereum, which Martin pointed out, there's a lot of centralizing forces, even though it's supposed to be a highly decentralized network, but things like flashbots would essentially compel people to centralize to capture MEV. So both things are necessary, and all three of you represent different parts of the infra stack. So the validator network, HOPR is doing the network privacy, and then of course Martin the chain. So can you talk about how you enable those properties to happen with your service?
Well, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, at least in our case, we are at the kind of the base layer of the infrastructure. So what we are aiming to do is to bring validation to everyone and to make it accessible to everyone. At the end of the day, all the Ethereum network where we are focusing on is built up by engineers, and at the end of the day, the engineers, what they want is to make the networks more efficient and more resilient. And sometimes that leaves a big chunk of the population out of the network itself, or to having the chance to become part of the network, or to be an essential part within the network itself. And we are trying to help to reduce that barrier in the most used network, which is Ethereum. Just by decreasing making it easier to become a validator within the Ethereum network.
Yeah, so our contribution at HOPR is towards privacy on the most fundamental layer, which is the exchange of data from A to B. So not on-chain, but before it even hits the chain potentially. I know there's a lot of gigabrains working on all this ZK technology. We're basically just building the pipes to get you there. So in a privacy-preserving fashion. And to me, that's important because we've seen that large providers such as Consensus are tracking users' IP addresses. And if you think about it, what does that mean? That means that even if we have perfect on-chain privacy, we have a primary identifier of you, and that's going to be your IP address and other metadata. And we want to protect that one. And starting right now on the execution layer of Ethereum, protecting your wallets between the wallet and the RPC provider, that's something that we're busy on right now. But we did last year already a small research project on analyzing actually the consensus layer, and specifically we did this on Gnosis chain to basically link the IP address of a validator to their pub key. So that just shows that there is an inherent privacy issue also in the consensus layer that we certainly will also tackle, but it's a bit more challenging than the execution layer.
Yeah, I mean, from a kind of chain perspective, we need to try to look at all of those things and find solutions. So yeah, we both look critically at Ethereum and try to either address issues in Ethereum, but of course take the learnings and apply them to Gnosis chain and be very mindful on the decisions we are doing on Gnosis chain. One project, I'm quite excited about is, I shared the slide where it showed kind of how much block space is censored, so meaning that we know a specific number of blocks, filter transactions based on their content. So if the transaction contains a specific content, then specific blocks will never accept such a transaction. And again, it was as bad as up to 80%. And again, it has become better by through projects, including us, stepping in and kind of running relays that do not censor. But fundamentally, the problem is of blockchains like Ethereum that transactions are visible. You can see their content and kind of decide, or a validator can decide based on their content how to treat the transaction. So one more fundamental fix we are working on is this concept of shutterized beacon chain. So the idea is that transactions are encrypted and they are included into the chain while they are still encrypted. So you can't discriminate a transaction based on their content. That's one thing. So it absolutely addresses censorship resistance. The other thing that it addresses is also kind of those front-running and part of the MEV problem. It doesn't solve all MEV, but it certainly does solve the front-running problem, that if you kind of reveal that you're doing, let's say, buying a token, then currently there is this opportunity for others to kind of front-run you, buy the token just before you, and kind of even go so far that they atomically buy it before you, let you buy it at a slightly higher price, and immediately sell it after, sandwich you and then extract profit. So again, those two things, censorship resistant and part of the MEV problem, are solved if a transaction is included when it's still encrypted, and then only in a second step it will be revealed, but then the network has already committed to execute this transaction in exactly that order. So kind of then it's quote unquote too late to try to censor it or to front run the transaction. And again, that's something we are right now developing for Gnosis chain. It absolutely can be applied to Ethereum as well, and we will try to bring it also into Ethereum.
Sounds like a drastic change. Like, what do you think are the chances we will see this on Ethereum mainnet deployed, let's say, in the next 5 years?
It's way less of a drastic change than it sounds like, and it's actually possible. All it needs is validators commit to using that scheme. So a validator, and you can even start with a soft commitment, and then later do things like bonding, that they either use kind of restake their Ether, or kind of even put in additional collateral on. But essentially, all you need is commitment from validators to use the scheme, and you still have a hybrid model. So you can still use the transactions as everyone is doing them. So you would just have those two options. Either you send this encrypted transaction that always will be included with some delay. You have to kind of commit to it at some point, and will be only executed at a second point. But still, you can just do regular transactions as of today.
Yeah, so maybe this is the last question before we go to Q&A. So if we measure decentralization using the Nakamoto coefficient, which is the metric we kind of use as the North Star for decentralization, and Nakamoto coefficient essentially measures the minimum number of entities you need to compromise in order to capture the network, and essentially the network would not be credibly neutral. So this is something we want to do on Gnosis chain, as well as to measure and also incentivize for greater Nakamoto coefficient. We have a dashboard called d14n.info. You can go there and check it out. We measure both Gnosis chain and Ethereum. So the question is, like, if you look across the industry, none of the blockchains have really high coefficient. So the question is, why do you think that's the case? Why do projects not optimize for that, and why do users not care as much to compel these blockchains to increase their resilience? Yeah.
Well, I would say that, coming back to what I was saying at the beginning, I think it comes back to a matter of efficiency at the end of the day. When you are trying to build something, you want to do it as more efficient, as a user accessible as possible. At the end of the day, that leads to centralization, because it's the most efficient way to build the things. So at the end of the day, trying to push decentralization is it's tough, because it's not that efficient, and you are not creating such resilient systems sometimes, or those efficient systems. So I mean, I think it's just a matter of engineering and mentality, that if you want really to kind of to push something to make it more effective and the user experience to be easier, you always tend to centralization.
Yeah, I think to me the problem is a bit, the human is a very simple animal. And we learn from pain. And yeah, so one unfortunate thing is that there's some pains from which we can learn in a useful fashion. Like, I think FTX was, for some people, very painful, and I'm sorry for that, but for others, like a very good learning experience. Like, I went through that myself, to learn to lose money on a centralized exchange. But when it comes to these bigger systems like blockchains, I'm actually pretty scared, because there's very few cases where we can actually learn from that, right? So if we think about what is the GOX moment or the FTX moments of, you know, credibly neutral systems failing, that failure mode will come pretty late, and yeah, it can be pretty bad. So that's why I'm properly concerned about it, and happy to have panels like this to try to educate our very simple minds to take it serious.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly always the kind of force towards centralization. So I think it also maybe comes in waves, that kind of there's a push for decentralization, but then, yeah, centralization creeps in various ways. Yeah, I mean, luckily there are people, there are projects that do value decentralization. Of course, it's important that this decentralization then also kind of brings fruits, and the fruit ideally is that, what I described in the very beginning, that it is simply neutral platforms will attract more builders, because they understand that they don't want to be locked into something, and that then ultimately can lead to richer ecosystems. And I mean, I think generally we are seeing that in Ethereum. So don't need to be kind of too pessimistic about it. So I think Ethereum has shown that is in this open kind of DeFi ecosystem where literally thousands of teams are contributing. It created, or in some forms it developed so rapidly that it absolutely did kind of overtook the also the user experience. So I would say let it put high fees on Ethereum aside. I would say the user experience in many cases, well, at least from my perspective, is much better than what I have with my bank or my kind of centralized exchange or even broker. Well, I don't even want to think about that, kind of compared to, I don't know, a Uniswap experience.
Cool. Maybe questions?
Yeah. With regard to encryption for transactions, could you repeat what the term is, and like, does it work all within the same block, or do you have to wait one block?
Yeah. Yeah, so it does not work in the same block. So how it works is that for each future block, there is a specific key for that block, and that can be generated with something called distributed key generation. So there is no single entity that has that key, and then you encrypt your transaction. You kind of say slot number 27 for that future slot. I want to encrypt it, and then you need to include it in any block before that, so up to block 26. And after block 26 is created, Then multiple validators can release their key share, and then the transaction can be made, can be decrypted, and then the validator of that block would commit to mine, or kind of to include those pre-scheduled transactions first in exactly the order they were pre-committed on chain, and then they can fill up the rest of the block with regular transaction. That's how it works.
Quick follow-up to that. Also, what are the trade-offs, I guess, of the system? And could you still have MEV by, like, the from address, I imagine, is still out in the open?
So I would say I don't even think there are trade-offs, because it's a pure additional opt-in scheme. So kind of if you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. So I don't think it takes anything away. It just gives it another option. The from address can also be hidden. But yeah, there will still be some MEV issues will still remain. That's I think pretty fundamental.
And was that the shutterized beacon chain transaction you referred to?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. I think we can thank our panel.